We're back with another episode of the Football Podcast. I'm Adam, joined by Jonathan, and we're going to be finishing up our grades for the AFC 2025 NFL offseason.
So, Adam, what was the philosophy for grading these teams?
Yeah, when I look at offseason grades, I think the biggest thing you have to consider is just what are the expectations for the team and what are the realistic moves that can be made. So, for example, like a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, I didn't hold them to the standards that I did, let's say the Ravens or the Bengals last week, just because they just have different expectations. Like they are not a team that can make the moves around the edges or even a big move in order to become contenders. And so I kind of looked at that, just like what are their expectations. And then the other thing I looked at is just the direction they're going. If they don't have those expectations to be Super Bowl contenders, are they starting a rebuild? Are they productive in the moves that they're making? And then kind of use that to help determine what grade I thought their offseason had altogether.
Yeah. Well, I can go ahead and kick us off. So, in today's episode, we are finishing off the AFC, going through the AFC West, which I'll be handling. And then, Adam, I believe you're doing the AFC South.
Yep.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and kick us off with the Raiders. I'm just going to be going through a little bit of the previous season. They went 4-13, the 29th ranked offense and the 25th ranked defense.
Oof.
It was a season where the starts were split between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, with a random Desmond Ridder start thrown into there in, I think, week 15, in which he threw the ball 39 times for a team collective points of 9. So that was the quarterback play for the Raiders. I don't want to be one of those people who's overly reliant on analysis by quarterback, but if you looked at the room going into last season, it was a team that had a ceiling of 5 wins. Obviously, then Antonio Pierce is out as the head coach after his first full season as a head coach, not an interim coach. And one last note I wanted to make, it's a little bit similar to last week's episode when I went over the Patriots, but the Raiders heading into week 16 were 2-12. If they just won one more game or lost out, they're a top 3 pick, potentially the number 1 pick. Instead, they win meaningless back-to-back games and fall to the 6th pick. So I don't care if you get Ashton Gianti, who we're going to talk about later. That's just bad business, even if you got your guy. But when we look at the actual offseason, we're looking at it through 3 areas: coaching, draft, and free agency. And this is one of the teams where coaching matters a lot into looking at their offseason. They bring in
For
Pete
sure.
Carroll, the 53-year-old, 73-year-old, as I like to call him. He's just the fountain of youth, that man. Uh, he's a floor raiser. Obviously, he brings in a culture. I almost feel like it's not worth talking too much about Pete Carroll because we know what he's going to bring to the table. I do think it will be interesting. He's bringing in Chip Kelly as his offensive coordinator. He obviously, most recently, last season, won a national championship as the offensive coordinator for Ohio State. This is actually Chip Kelly's first time back in the NFL since, if you can guess it at home, 2016, when he was the head coach of the 49ers for a season. And that was actually the Kaepernick protest year. So it's been a while since Chip Kelly was in the NFL. He's going to be bringing back probably because he always really had more of a collegiate style offense, and that's what he'll be bringing to the Raiders. And then I have to talk about Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator. The guy has to be dynamite in the locker room and front office meetings because this is the third regime that he's been under at Las Vegas. So he was hired for the DC job by Josh McDaniels. When Josh
Yeah.
McDaniels was fired, Antonio Pierce kept him on, and now Antonio Pierce was fired, and Pete Carroll is keeping him on. That is incredibly rare. That can happen at position coach levels. That is almost never happening at a coordinator of an entire side of the football field.
Yeah.
So Patrick Graham is a guy that clearly the Raiders as an institution wants to keep around.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the whole entire league is really high on him. He's a coordinator that it seems like last year within the defensive coordinator, I guess, market, he was pretty high up there on the list. I know the Bengals kind of narrowed it down between him and Al Golden, just because of what he was able to do. Even though I know you said they had the 25th worst defense last year, he just is such a dynamic defensive coordinator that really knows how to maximize defenses. And so, yeah, like he's an incredible defensive coordinator. And I think that
Yeah,
with Pete
I don't
Carroll,
think you
that's
can
going to be
hold
exciting.
that. Yeah, you can't hold that season against him. That was more so
Mm-mm.
personnel and a whole bunch of other issues that were going on in that locker room. And it's hard to predict the wheel of coaching in the NFL, but just based on that fact alone, I think Patrick Graham has to be someone who 10 years from now, uh, at the longest, is probably getting a head coaching job at some
Right.
point in the NFL. But then we turn towards the draft because I liked the coaching moves that the Raiders made. You're bringing in someone who uh, Pete Carroll doesn't have that long. I mean, just biologically almost, he is 73 years old, but he's almost. I mean, he feels like the head coaching equivalent of a stopgap quarterback, someone who can stabilize the franchise. And for where the Raiders have been at for the last decade, that's a good thing. Then we go towards the draft, and I already talked about last season bad draft positioning, but that doesn't affect my grade here. They take Ashton Giante, running back from Boise State, number 6 overall. Uh, Behind Cam Ward to the Titans, Giante was to Vegas was probably the biggest lock of the draft in terms of a first
Mhm.
round pick. It was kind of, which is weird because it was the 6th overall pick, but it felt like the number one pick was certain. Then 2 through 5, it was like, well, it could be just about anybody. There could be trades made. And it felt like at least a week out of the draft, Giante was always going to go to the Raiders. Um, he's been talked about endlessly. He's a great running back. The concern is almost entirely the fact that he played at a mid-major in college and
Yeah.
not at a powerhouse program. But I almost feel like for the running back position, I don't know how much I can value it. It's almost in a weird way similar to the quarterback position, where I feel like the pedigree of the program you were at, I can't really use as much of as a determining factor in analyzing how you're going to perform in the NFL. I
Yeah.
think most everyone would grade that pick positively.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially like you said with the running back position. Like I do think that there are positions where, for example, quarterback potentially, where the speed of the game matters so much in terms of your decision making that going to, that power 4, power 5 conference is really, really important. Just because, the competition is so much higher, the speed of the game is so much quicker that that is a really good or a tell in terms of how well that quarterback is going to perform. When it
That's
comes
fair.
to the
And
running back
definitely,
position,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of the running back position, I just don't see that as being as important. And I would say that at the very least, the season that he had bridges the gap, or I guess outweighs the lack of
Fair. Yeah.
competition.
Yes. I mean, the man was, I don't know the exact number, but uh, insanely close to breaking Barry Sanders'
Yeah.
collegiate rushing record. I mean, that alone, you're a stud. And it certainly doesn't matter nearly as much as say, but the position group I have in mind is offensive line because
Yeah,
just the
for sure.
physical difference of going up against
Yes.
Power Four program guys and really kind of the Power Two of the SEC of the Big Ten. Uh, but running back, I'm not as concerned. And then the other pick that I'll highlight, because not going through their entire draft class, is Darian Porter, cornerback at Iowa State. He's 6'2" and he runs a 4.30, the 40-yard dash. He actually started college as a wide receiver. He moved to corner in 22, and he holds the Iowa State record for the most games ever played in their football program's history. So this is a guy that's coming in experienced and ready to rock. And you could talk about the value of taking a guy that is that older at that position. It certainly probably puts slightly more of a cap on his ceiling, but for how weak that cornerback room is, he's going to come in and immediately have impact on that defense.
He might be the
So
veteran.
it might be.
He might be the
So
veteran of the group.
yeah, I liked this draft for Vegas. I think really what we're going to go through here is I liked pretty much all of the AFC West draft classes, and a lot of people agree with me on that fact. Uh, and then we get into free agency. And I do want to note for this team that if it wasn't for the Patriots' laughably easy schedule, this would probably be the best bet for biggest win-loss improvement, just on its face. You're
Uh-huh.
bringing in Geno Smith. That's the headliner of this, which I don't care what you think of Geno Smith. Uh, that is almost we could run through it ourselves if we wanted to. The Raiders going from Aiden O'Connell / Gardner Minshew to Geno Smith is probably the biggest quarterback upgrade in terms of non-rookies. So I'm not counting Cam Ward to the Titans. In terms of a non-drafted rookie move, I think this is the biggest quarterback room improvement that there was across the entire league, and that has to
Uh,
matter for something. And then
yeah.
you and then really the entirety of the offseason that was in terms of acquisitions was improving the offensive line. You're bringing in and you might find this more questionable, Alex Kappa, giving him a 2-year $11 million contract, coming over from the Bengals. I know you have some opinions on Alex Kappa, but yeah.
I think it's a good move. He is the type of I don't like it if they were competing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of just bringing in a solid guard, see, like Kappa was really, really good until he got hurt. He got hurt in the playoffs that one year when I think we made it to the AFC Championship, and he just kind of hasn't been the same since then. But I think that as like a veteran piece, like I think that's a fine move. They didn't overpay him by any means, so yeah, I like the move.
Yeah. And then they had quality extensions, a small group of extensions, but quality ones: Max Crosby, Malcolm Kuntz, Adam Butler, Darnay Holmes. But this team actually had the biggest roster turnover in the NFL. They only retained 44 players from last season's roster.
Oh
That's the
wow.
fewest in the NFL. So it is just based on that number, and then combining that with how big of a change of quality in the quarterback room, it is the biggest turnover in the NFL. They're going to be, if it wasn't for how quality the quarterback play and the coaching of the AFC West is, they're probably, and even still, they're going to be a sleeper playoff pick for many people. I mean, I think you're going to, and I'm not agreeing with this necessarily. I
Yeah.
think that you would, when we get closer to the season, a lot of media members, it's going to be a hot pick for the AFC West to have an NFC North type season in terms
Yeah.
of all four teams potentially making the playoffs. It'll be one of those things where hot take, but it will be so popular that it almost moves out of hot take territory. But yeah, there's no
Well,
other grade to give
especially
this. This is an
because
A. This is probably, go ahead.
especially I was just gonna say, especially because they're in the Chiefs division. Like I can see the headline now, like, could the Raiders push the Chiefs? I like unquestionably that's gonna happen with the Denver Broncos and the Chargers, but I definitely think that that could happen with the Raiders, just based on all
Yeah,
this turnaround.
but And to be clear, this offseason is an A. This is probably my highest
Yeah.
graded offseason outside of the Patriots. Now, that's almost an equal 50-50 between where the roster and the coaching was at compared to where it is now. But that doesn't mean it's not an A offseason. So I have to tip my cap to the Raiders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit all the major points. One question though, so
Mhm.
obviously Max Crosby got a bag. Do you think that that was worth it? Like, do you think that that was a good, that he was worth that amount of money? Like, what are your thoughts on that contract situation?
Um, the analysis that I'll say is the same thing as what you said about Alex Kappa, and it's
Mhm.
two completely different players and situations. It was worth it for where they're at. Uh,
Mhm.
Pete Carroll is going to be the soul of this team, but Max Crosby is still the heart of the team. Like you
Yeah.
almost needed it. It's similar to, well, because I'm actually not the biggest fan of the Browns' retention of Myles Garrett, but it's similar
Neither.
decision making by the Raiders where, one, the guy's just a stud, but two, you almost can't let him go. I mean, at the bare minimum, just due to fan service. I mean, you can't let a guy like Max Crosby walk. I mean, you just can't. So, I'm not saying that the money that they gave him is guaranteed to be worth it entirely, but I also think as the cap space continually rises, there could be a thing where we look back in 3 years and be like, yeah, that was a great extension.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, like I believe they paid Myles Garrett 40 million. I just got brought it up. Max Crosby's contract was 23.5 million. So that
Yeah, no,
alone.
he's not getting paid near the top
No.
market, but it's so I yeah, there's no reason to think of it as not a quality extension.
Yeah. Nope, I agree. I think that's I think you kind of hit the nail on the head and hit all of the right points. So kind of keeping the vibes up, I'm going to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars because I also thought they had a pretty good off season.
I
And so
guess
last year,
in the same way that Aaron Glenn is propelling the Jets higher in my offseason grade, you really like Liam Cohen. You're falling for the
I
Liam Cohen
really
propaganda.
I really like Liam Cohen. I really like what he did last year with the Buccaneers. So yes, that was a big factor when it comes to my grade. But last year, some of the things that they needed, and again, this is a perfect example of a time where my grade is not based on like whether or not they're Super Bowl contenders. It's based on what their expectations are. Last year, they needed help. In the wide receiver room. They needed help with their secondary. Obviously, they needed help with their tight end after releasing Evan Ingram. They needed safety help because they lost Cisco. So they kind of had a lot of pieces, as you would expect from a team that's not very good. Last year, they won 4 games. And so, really, they're in an interesting situation, too, just because you have a guy like Trevor Lawrence who I think, at least from a maybe not from like a fan's perspective, like we can come up here and say, like, it's over, like, just pack it up, pal, like, you're done in the NFL. But I think that he's shown enough light that you, as an organization, have to, you know, stick with him. Like, I don't think that you can necessarily say, like, oh, we should get rid of him or we should try to, I guess you could say, trade him at his max value, which,
I mean, he's
you
won a
know,
playoff game.
exactly. So not a lot of quarterbacks have done that. And so basically what this season or what this offseason is about in my mind is basically reaching a level of competence or an organization within the Jaguars and their team to be able to gauge where Trevor Lawrence is at. I think that's kind of the best way that I would put it is because obviously they did a full clean sweep of their front office and their coaching. And so basically they reset the script, which I feel bad for Trevor Lawrence because how many times this is the third time in his career. But they kind of reset everything. And I think the idea behind this offseason was let's just see what we have. Like, let's just take a step back, let's reset and gauge where we actually are. Because I don't think that many people saw the Jaguars going 4-13 last year. And I know that Trevor Lawrence was hurt, but even his numbers when he wasn't was not good. So like I said, they needed a wide receiver to replace Kirk. So some offseason moves. They got Diami Brown. I think that's a good, solid wide receiver 2 option and a strong replacement for Christian Kirk. They also addressed a little bit the offensive line. Last year it was the 23rd ranked offensive line in the league. Not the best. They signed, for example, Jordan Lewis to a 3-year, $30 million deal with $20 million or a guarantee. He's a nickel cornerback, kind of addressing the safety that I was talking, or the secondary issues that I was talking about. Last year, he only averaged 5 pass breakups, but he only gave up a 99 passer rating. It's just a veteran presence, I think. They might have overpaid a little bit, but I don't know. I think that he can have a bounce back year. So basically all of that to say, their offseason moves weren't really that impactful unless you're super, super high on Brown, which I don't know if anyone is. But again, I think the real meat and potatoes when it comes to the Jaguars offseason is them acquiring Liam Cohen as their head coach. I really, really like the hire. So here's some numbers for you. Duval, which I Googled that because I wasn't sure what that is. By the way, Duval is the county in which Jacksonville
I think you're late to the
resides.
game here. I think most people know that now.
Well, whatever. Why would I know that? That was never something that I really cared to know about until I was doing this, and I was like, maybe
You
I
don't
should
care
look
about
that
the
up.
county that the Jacksonville Jaguars play in?
That's such a weird thing to be. They're super
Also, to be
excited
clear,
about
I
this.
think the list is because everyone was joking about like how awkward that initial press conference is. There is a surprising correlation in the last like 7, 8 years of NFL head coaching hires to awkward initial press conferences and actually being successful as a head coach. I'm being dead serious. Like you
That's
can go through
really
the
funny.
list.
I would love to see
So
those numbers.
yeah, I'd love to look at the data there. No,
Let me
I'm
look at the
serious.
research.
I mean, you want your head coach coming out and just doing something that will be instantly clipped and be like, what is going on? Like, that is what you want if you're a struggling franchise bringing in a new head coach.
Okay, well, there you go. That was not part of my analysis on Liam Cohen, but just to add flame to that fire, another reason why I really like this coaching change. But last year, he led the NFL's only offense that finished top 5 in yards per game, scoring, passing yards per game, and rushing yards per game. In fact, the Buccaneers were the first team in NFL history to complete 75% of their passes and average over 5 yards per carry throughout an entire season.
Wow.
So that is impactful to me, right? That they were able to.
I'm friends with a couple Buccaneers guys. They were legitimately devastated when Liam Cohen was hired away. Like they kind of knew that he wasn't going to last long, but he was a hidden gem of that Buccaneers team. And yeah, I'm probably just as high as you on Liam Cohen.
No, I just love it. And, obviously when it comes to these coordinators transitioning into head coaching positions, there's always going to be the question of, can he establish a winning culture? Can he be that locker room presence that kind of unites his team? That's a question mark that's just going to exist with every single coordinator. If it turns out that is just kind of being a coordinator is his peak because he doesn't have those qualities, okay. But I feel like all I can really gauge this hire on is what he produced on the field. And what he produced on the field was last year arguably the most dynamic and cohesive offense in the NFL when it comes to the merging of the pass game and the run game. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. He has such a modern offense and a dynamic offense that can adapt to really any situation. And if there's one word that I would use to describe Liam Cohen's offense, is flexibility. And I mean that in two ways. The first way is that every single week, he seems to come up with the perfect scheme to be able to adapt to the defense that he's playing. But then secondly, he's able to adapt his offense to his personnel. Obviously, last year, one of the biggest problems with the Buccaneers was kind of the rotation of their wide receivers, right? They constantly had guys coming in and out. And so his ability to still maximize his team, given the changes in their wide receiver depth, was incredibly impressive. And even looking at Baker Mayfield arguably had the best season of his career last year. And I've always
I
been
think he
high on Baker
definitively
Mayfield.
did.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, you could talk about the nostalgia of his peak on the Browns. This was definitively his best season.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, there was kind of that wave of those like higher to mid-range contracts for quarterbacks, and those types of extensions that were made. I feel like if you're talking about bang for your buck production for how much money you paid, kind of when you're talking about like Dak Prescott, Tua, Lawrence, all of those quarterbacks that got paid in that time period, arguably Baker Mayfield was the most efficient in terms of how much it cost for the production that you got on the field. And so I'm not saying that to kind of diminish what Liam Cohen did, but rather to say, I think that Liam Cohen really unlocked a version of Baker Mayfield in which he was controlled and poised, and he was able to create advantages and not get his passion, which I think is his biggest strength, get in the way, because I also think it can be his biggest weakness in terms of, just kind of, I guess, like inaccurate passes, kind of going for it all, not looking for the check down when it's necessary. Those interception numbers sometimes can be too high. And so Liam Cohen was really able to mix the pass game and the run game to maximize Baker Mayfield. And that's why I like this so much, because if you're a team that's looking at like, how do you want to grow, and you have Trevor Lawrence, who is the number one overall pick, you need to pick a not just a head coach, but a leader of the offense that has proven value when it comes to being able to maximize the quarterback position. And that's exactly what Liam Cohen can do. He's also part of McVay's coaching tree. He was a wide receiver coach, a QB coach, and also an OC of the Rams before he became the coordinator of the Buccaneers. So that obviously has value. There's a pretty big track record of, Mike or McVay's coaching tree. Mike, I don't even know what I'm talking about. McVay's coaching tree and how those coaches are successful. So I think that this is really going to put Trevor Lawrence in the spotlight. Like I said before, the number one thing the Jaguars need to do is figure out what they even have in Trevor Lawrence and see, like, did he peak? Right? Was that year where he won a playoff game? Was that year where he took his team to the playoffs? Was that his peak? Was that all you can get from him, or is there more that he can give you, and is there more consistency that they can have, or that he can have? So I really like the move. I think that they really did a great job with this hire. Right now, I think it's the one coach that I'm rooting for the most, and I think I'm the most excited about in the entire, even with the Lions coordinators and that whole situation. I just really like him, and I think the numbers speak for themselves, but also, like, talk about a team last year in the Buccaneers, specifically their offense, because, like, when you really think about it, it's amazing how many guys got hurt and how many guys were moving in and out, and they consistently ran the ball effectively and passed effectively in a way that no other team really did.
I mean, it's really just ultimately a question, and it doesn't affect the offseason grade. It's really more so how will we look back on it. Does Trevor Lawrence stink? or is he good? I mean, I think that if you're as high as you are on Liam Cohen, and I'm pretty high on him as well, there's not many more excuses for Trevor.
Exactly. And that's why I love this move. I think that's why I love this move the most. Because, like, you as a Jaguars need to figure out what is going on.
Yep. So you're giving it an A?
Yeah, and I haven't even talked about the draft. To clarify, though, yes, I will give them an A. So obviously, the biggest thing I'm going to talk about in the draft is Travis Hunter. I
Yep.
think that this is kind of a mixed ceiling or a mixed bag. So the Jags obviously traded up to take him. Um, I'm trying to remember if I wrote down the trade details. Yeah, here it is. So obviously there were a lot of late round picks that were swapped, but the biggest thing is that the Browns received obviously the number 5 pick from this year or this last draft, but then they also get the first round pick of next draft. So Jacksonville's 2026 first rounder. That's a lot for a team in Jacksonville's position. What that signals to me is they are essentially saying that Travis Hunter is worth 2 first round picks.
Yeah.
And the
Well, I
only
mean, I mean, their GM, I'm blanking on his name, comes in the press conference afterwards, and he's legitimately. It's a bit interesting because he's a young guy. I don't know if you've seen Succession. It reminds me of a scene from Succession a little bit, but it's simultaneously heartwarming where he's this very young millennial, like football progressivist, and he's using this very like corporate football language, but he's really just completely all in on Travis Hunter as a guy. So in
I
that
have a
sense,
quote.
yeah, institutionally, they're behind Travis Hunter
They
a
are.
thousand
This
percent.
is this is Ryan Gladstone on Travis Hunter. He said he elevates not only his football team, not only this city, but the sport itself, right? Along the way, you can count however many drafts you want to. There are players who have the capacity to alter a game. There are players who have the capacity to alter the trajectory of a team. There are very few players who have the capacity to alter the trajectory of the sport itself. Travis, while he still has a lot to learn, in our eyes, has the potential to do just that. I mean, come on. He is hyped about this pick, and he was willing to put kind of everything on the line in order to secure this. I think that rightfully so. He really like I think that his job is on the line depending on how this goes, right? And
Yeah,
like that could
and
be
clearly he's, I mean, I'm almost shocked with how passionate he was. Clearly seemed like this was the plan almost as soon as the cards settled on the draft. I'm almost shocked that how this didn't leak that Jacksonville was looking this intensely to move up, unless they kept it just super close to the vest and,
yeah.
30 minutes before throw the offer at Cleveland being like, hey, this is what we're giving you. But I mean, yeah, they're fully in on Travis Hunter.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of people, a lot of old heads who are kind of like, you can't play 2 positions in the NFL. Um, that's
I'm one.
I yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like that's probably true.
I feel old heads. You might be right. In fact, you almost
Listen,
certainly
you
are.
you, you might have got this one.
We've
But
just gassed up Travis Hunter as being this generational player. Gladstone's coming out. He's literally going to change the sport itself. Probably not. Let's just be
yeah, but
clear.
no.
He's probably
No.
not actually going to fundamentally change the sport.
But like, I don't know. I feel like if there's anyone who could have done it, Travis Hunter has the best opportunity to do it. Last year in college, he won the Heisman, he won the Bednardic, and he won the Bolitnikoff. Obviously, he was exceptional at both positions. 92 receptions, 1,100 yards, 32 tackles, 11 pass breakups, and 4 interceptions, and then 14 touchdowns as a wide receiver. And so I kind of just view him as like having an incredibly high ceiling. I'm not going to say it's out of the realm of possibility for him to start both ways. People have said that throughout his entire career, and he proved them wrong every single time. But I think that that's his ceiling, that he can be a starter on both sides of the ball. I think his floor is just like a really solid wide receiver that's worthy of a first round pick. And so from that perspective, I think the move makes sense. Um, but like when looking at the Jaguars as a whole, what I see is an organization with a clear plan and a clear direction. And that moves me when it comes to these offseason grades. If you watched last week's episode, I gave pretty much everyone a D, except for one team. And the reason why is because I saw these teams that either just made really stupid moves like the Bengals or just did really or just kept making the same moves that kept them in the same direction that doesn't lead to winning championship football like the Steelers. And I think the Jaguars are the opposite of that. They brought in a young GM, Ryan Gladstone, who is convicted about a position and went through and went for it no matter what anyone said. They have a guy in Liam Cohen who is an incredible offensive mind that I think is going to spark life into this offense and provide a floor that a lot of people don't expect. And I think that whether or not you're in on Travis Hunter, these are the types of moves that will lead to winning football in years to come. I could be completely wrong, right? Travis Hunter could suck, right? Liam Cohen could not be the leader of men that we expect. But I still think I will still maintain, even if it turns out that this was a completely failed experiment, that these were the right moves because they picked a direction and they stuck to it. And there was enough sample size beforehand to justify those moves in the moment.
I think that, to be clear, my position on Travis Hunter is I think that he was worthy of being the second overall pick. The question is about, is he worth the second overall pick and then a probably decently valuable first round pick the next season, plus some not meaningless pick swaps? That's the question. It's not about, was this guy worth taking a swing on at the number 2 overall pick? It's the value that you gave away on top of that.
Right. And, the only thing we'll have to see to find out. I lean towards no, but everything else points to an A, I think, for the Jaguars.
Yeah.
And again, maybe I'm just crazy, but I just really like Liam Cohen. I think he's awesome.
That's fair. That's where I'm at. If you watch last week's episode, that's where I'm at with Aaron Glenn and the Jets. And it's those two things where really the only thing that's standing as an obstacle is the entire history of them both as franchises. That's the only thing. That's the only thing stopping us from believing in Aaron Glenn and Liam Cohen is the entire history of the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New York Jets.
Remember that one time with Blake Bortles? Dude,
I
they should have
Blake Bortles.
Really? I love Blake Bortles.
I despise Blake Bortles is an enemy of this show.
No, he's a friend of the show. I was just on the phone with him last week.
Man. Teddy Bridgewater at Louisville going up against Blake Bortles at Central Florida. Oh my goodness, those were some peak college football years. But yeah,
that's so funny. Oh my gosh. Okay, well I think we should play a game now. Let's do some
game time.
So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works.
The technological power of this show, folks.
We have never been more back. Okay. Alrighty. So what we're going to do is I'm going to name an NFL player, and Jonathan, I want you to tell me if they are underrated, overrated, or perfectly rated. Make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Let's get into it. First up is Sauce Gardner. It's a tough one.
I think, because how you judged this, I'm going to be doing this as the combination of the media and NFL pop culture, NFL Twitter, X, whatever. Which means I almost think that it's leaning towards overrated.
Really?
But I think it balances out because I do think that some people underrate him just because, and maybe I'm focusing too much on post the first season of his career, and then I think last season he almost becomes underrated. I think it balances. So I think it balances out. I think that he's probably become under discussed since the travesty of the Jets' last couple of seasons. So yeah, I think he's well rated.
Okay. I don't know. I think that he's a little bit I definitely don't think he's overrated. I think that kind of like you said, the NFL community just reacts super, super quickly to whatever happens. And so, because of that, I think that, last year obviously was a down season for him and really the whole Jets organization. And so, people have kind of forgotten about, his rookie season and what he was able to do as a
He
rookie.
also, just to be
I
clear, he carries such a load.
He
Like
does.
I feel bad for coming out right out of the gates and thinking it could be over. I've just talked to like there are some people who I've encountered who are like he's CB1 best in the league, and so I'm probably being
Mm.
slanted because of that. I mean, he does so much for that defense, to be clear.
He does. He does. So yeah, I think I lean towards underrated just because of how much the NFL community reacts to, the previous season. But hopefully it starts to balance out and he has a comeback year under Aaron Glenn next year. All right, next up, we got Najee Harris. This is a tough one. I think he's just so like in terms of his actual production, like he's very consistent. Like I don't think there's been a year where he hasn't broken 1,000 yards rushing.
Yeah. I think
But
my gut reaction is that he's perfectly rated. And I think also you have to balance in, I talked about the media and the fans. I also just think you have to balance in what NFL front offices think of him. And he's a guy
yeah,
that clearly is valued at his position and has been consistently, even in a world where the running backs have been undervalued and are just starting to now potentially start to be overvalued. We'll see where the contracts trend towards. Yeah, I think that he's properly rated. I don't think I've ever walked away from a Najee Harris discussion being like, wow, you just think that this guy sucks, or you think
me
that
too.
this guy is incredible. Like, you don't ever encounter that.
I just think that in everything he does, he's right in the middle. When it comes to his production, he's right in the middle. And when it comes to how much he's rated, he's right in the middle. He's perfectly rated. He is
Yeah.
a fine running back. I think next year he's going to be really, really, I think he's going to be a really solid running back for the Chargers. I don't think it's going to, be this explosive season, but I don't think he's going to be absolutely terrible. I think he's just going to be a solid running back in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I think that's how he's viewed too. All right, next up, we got Max Crosby. This is an interesting one.
Underrated.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, especially relatively to how much weight he has to carry on that defensive line for the majority of his career, really over the last couple of seasons. I mean,
Yeah.
he's getting double teamed. And he's still producing. And I almost think, and we were talking about this earlier in the Raiders discussion. I think that he got a very good extension for the Raiders. I think that this is clearly a guy that could be. I mean, what did he get? 23 million a year.
Yeah, something like that.
I think that most front offices would put potentially, or at least I think front offices should look at him as someone who would be closer to 30 million than 20 million. So
Yeah.
yeah, underrated.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of teams or a lot of players on just bad teams generally get underrated. But last year, and especially this is a problem with defensive ends and how people view them in the NFL. Everyone just looks at one number, that being how many sacks you got. And there are
Which is
just
so
so many
bad.
different, yeah, it's just like such an easy rudimentary way of
The
analyzing
fact
a
that
position.
I get that he's played in the era of Aaron Donald and Miles Garrett and TJ Watt. The single-handed fact that people care about the sack statistic more than anything else, it's a travesty that Chris Jones will walk away never having won Defensive Player of the Year. And I know I'm a Chiefs fan. I know that I'm biased, but I
Yeah.
think that, and that applies equally to Max. Now, I don't know if Max Crosby's ever played at Defensive Player of the Year level, but he certainly gets undervalued because the only thing we ever care about season to season is how many sacks did
Right.
this guy get?
Well,
It's
and he's just
silly.
so undervalued, especially in the run defense. Like,
Yeah.
And I don't have any stats to back this up other than just like watching him. Like,
Watch him
so
play.
obviously, yeah, just like watch him play and you'll see that he is everywhere on the field. He is one of those guys that you can't really run like the classic zone away from him where the whole entire line kind of, let's say it's goes left, takes a step to the left and then leaves the guy on the edge, and just kind of lets him leaves him unblocked. And the idea is that the running back should be faster than the defensive end whenever they're moving away from him, right? That's generally what you would expect. You like I just feel like so often I see Max Crosby be able to push back on that and just completely beat the running back to the line of scrimmage, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yes, I
And
mean
so yeah,
it's
I think
like
he's
if
definitely underrated.
yeah, it's like you if you put Fred Warner into the body of like TJ
Yeah.
Watt. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy could. I have no doubt that if he like slimmed up and trained, the guy could probably play linebacker. I mean,
Oh
he's.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, he's a freak.
He is. He is. All right, next up we got Justin Herbert.
Depends on who you talk to,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think I almost have to say overrated. And I think that, and it's one of those things where I'm basing that entirely on the media and not on NFL social media because
Okay.
I think most of the general public has somewhat turned on Justin Herbert. But at what
Right.
point, like at what point to the arm talent and have you seen the throws that he can make and the rookie season win a playoff game, man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I get that that's such simplistic analysis for the quarterback, but guess what? The NFL's a small sample size sport. Win a playoff
Yeah.
game.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that like I agree with your analysis, but I don't necessarily agree with your conclusion, if that makes sense. Like I think you're right about how it seems like everyone has an extreme view of him. Like either
Yeah.
they think that he is, I've seen a lot of people say he's better than like Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson. But then I've also seen people talk about how he's not even a top 10 quarterback and how they'd rather have Sam Darnold last year than Justin Herbert and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
It's
And it's like, okay, so I just see that, I guess, duality and want to lean towards he's perfectly, almost perfectly rated because they balance each other out, if that makes sense.
that's fair.
Um, I think that, I don't know. I just feel like he's just been so unlucky. I think that Brandon Staley is one of the, if not the worst coaches that the NFL has seen in like 20 to 30 years. Like
I mean, in terms of
he
this
was
relative to how
exactly.
long he was coaching, yes. I mean, there have been Urban Meyer was
That's true. Okay,
horrific.
obviously that's true. That might have been a bit
Relative
extreme. Okay.
No, but I get what you mean. Relative to how
He
many
was
chances he was given.
so bad. Like his decision, and so especially when I look at, obviously last year is different when it comes to the playoffs, but when I look at some of the big time moments that Justin Herbert has been in, I almost single handedly attribute those losses to Brandon Staley and his decision making because like he's just been so bad. Like there are no words to describe how stupid the decisions of Brandon Staley have been throughout the years. Obviously, the best example is the last game of the season, right? Raiders Chargers, they tie, they're in. If they
I mean,
and but if they
yeah, that was
lose, they're
just
out. That whole process of him deciding like, oh, we're not gonna kick the field goal in
that
overtime.
was. I mean, that was literally Derek Carr's career highlight.
Yeah, like Brandon Staley is just so bad. And then the other thing too is I just sympathize him when it comes to the injuries. Like he's had pretty terrible injury luck. Um,
Fair.
and so
I
I
think
think
that
I might be higher on Justin Herbert than a lot of people that I've talked to, but I don't know. But I think a lot of that comes to just like my animosity towards Staley. Like I really like he's just such a terrible coach.
fair.
So
I
bad.
think, and this is
So
moving
bad.
a little bit away from the question, but my analysis of Herbert because I mean, the NFL it's obviously progressive and it adapts and it's constantly moving forward. But I think the historical precedent matters a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm having a hard time looking at the historical precedent and see, like, what's now the ceiling of a Herbert career? Like, how much more time does he have to change what his legacy is? Like, I'm having a hard time thinking of a quarterback that would have a
Elway,
season.
I think he's like the prime example of it's never too late. You know what I
That's
mean?
fair. I mean, if he turns it around, and to be clear, just in terms of talent, and Herbert is more talented than Elway, but
Yeah.
I guess you're right. I guess that's the best case scenario is an
Well,
Elway.
the only reason I bring that up, so we posted a video about Lamar Jackson and whether or not he's ever going to win a Super Bowl, and we were both like, probably not. And like everyone who said he was just pointed to John Elway. So that's kind of like the prime example for, hey,
Yes, and
anyone
the
can turn it
stylistic,
around.
and I like Herbert just because Lamar's so different. Herbert would be stylistically closer to Elway, but yeah, I mean that's kind of the one example that people have to
It
throw
really,
out of
it's the only one.
the quarterback that was clearly a franchise guy, but never could really get over the hump, and then he gets over the hump in a huge way.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what's the over under? I mean, what are we setting the over under on Justin Herbert's career AFC championship appearances? Like, it's over
Not.
under one at this point,
Yeah. It's not. It's not
or
the
like
best.
0.5. Like, it's not. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Okay.
I said
I'm sure we'll
anyways.
talk about him a little bit more whenever
Exactly.
we talk about the Chargers. All right. Next up, I think this is the last one. Joe Mixon. This is tough.
Probably, I'd probably put him in the same area as Najee Harris, where
Uh-huh.
it perfectly rated. Like I've never
Yeah.
come away from a conversation about Joe Mixon being like, wow, you really hate or love Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
He is
If
what
you
he
ask my
is.
dad, he's really underrated. He's
Dude, a
the most
sample of
underrated
one.
player in the.
If we did a
And he
Family
will
Feud
fight
style
that.
sample of 100 clones of your dad,
He was so pissed when the Bengals let him go. He hated that move.
well, I mean, and in that sense, he probably was right, but I think that could speak a little bit more to the Bengals running back room that they assembled
Yeah.
post Mixon than Joe Mixon.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I will say, I actually kind of tend to agree that he's underrated. The reason why
That's
people
fair.
do not realize how bad that Texans offensive line was last year.
Oh yeah. I mean, it
It
was the
was
worst. It was
so
the
bad.
worst.
Well, we'll talk about it. It was terrible. I'm going to get to it. Yeah, no, it was the worst offensive line by far in the NFL. And so like having that bad of an offensive line and still being able to be as productive as he was, I just don't think it's a talking point that enough people are realizing about Joe Mixon. That being said, it's kind of hard just cuz it's like and you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
like okay, cool. I don't really see any there's not really that big of an impact, but anyway, I'm still gonna fight for my guy.
Fair.
I think he's
Joe
underrated.
Mixon, friend of the show.
Friend of the show. Alrighty, let's move on. What's the next team you got, Jonathan?
We're gonna blitzkrieg through the Denver Broncos.
Sounds good.
They went 10-7 last year with a wild card loss. It was the most positive season they had as a franchise since Peyton Manning's retirement. Now, there's a weird dichotomy in how the Broncos season went because by their in-season performance grade. So if you just look at last season starting week one, so not what the thought was going into it, they actually underperformed because they had the 10th overall offense and the third overall defense. And the analytics on that spit out that they should be winning between 11 and a half to 12 games. So, based on how they performed, they actually underperformed in win loss totals. But their Vegas over under win totals was 5.5.
Oh wow.
So,
Oh my gosh.
like, I mean, yeah, they were, I believe, the greatest overperformance by Vegas win-loss expectancy. Uh, the season is really the Bo Nix question.
Mhm.
He didn't crack 4,000 passing yards or 30 passing touchdowns, and he had 15 total turnovers. I don't say that to hate on Bo Nix. He was a rookie quarterback, but that's just a fact. So it's like some people talk about his rookie season as if it was in the echelon of like a Justin Herbert type rookie season. I would pump the brakes a little bit.
Well, also he's pretty old too, isn't he?
Yes, and my opinion on Bo Nix, to be clear, because it does somewhat affect, because it does affect
Yeah.
my analysis of the offseason. He is a player that has clearly a good floor as an NFL quarterback. I don't know if he's a force multiplier. I don't
Hmm.
know if he's someone who's going to amplify the abilities of the team around him. It's more so that he is amplified by the roster and the coaching staff. But that being said, let's look at the offseason. Coaching. No major changes. They're bringing in Darren Rizzi to be the new special teams coordinator. We know what Sean Payton did last season. Can he build on it? The draft. Another quality draft. The entire AFC West really was. Jadea Barron, cornerback out of Texas. The rich get richer in the secondary is the highlight of this pick. I mean, he's joining Pat Surtain, Riley Moss, and Jaquan McMillan at cornerback. That is a loaded secondary. Vance Joseph, at defensive coordinator, can put this guy anywhere. Corner, safety, in the slot. He could play dime linebacker. He can do it all. The real pick that will actually be uh, more determine how we look back on the 2025 Broncos draft is RJ Harvey, running back out of University of
Yeah.
Central Florida. He's a 24-year-old running back. Typically, I would grade that decently negatively because
Yeah.
the value of taking a running back in the second round, when most people look at the running back position and say the best running backs are hitting a wall when they turn 29, 30, that means, I mean, it basically means that you're getting his rookie contract and then like part of one extension.
Right.
But it's a very situational pick because the running back room of the Broncos was a weakness. This guy is going to come in and probably be, if not by week 1, their featured back, by week 5. So, I mean, that's what you're looking at. So
Hmm.
it's a pick that you're taking for the floor, not the ceiling in this
Sure.
instance. And then I do just the one last guy in the draft that I have to highlight is Jeremy Crawshaw, who was the punter taken out of Florida. He was the only punter drafted, so shout out to punters. He's a former rugby guy because that's what all punters are nowadays. When you look at the free agency of the Broncos, uh, they basically just stole the 49ers defense, bringing in Dre Greenlaw and Ufanga, and they're signed to decent contracts.
Gosh. Talk
You're
about the
bringing
rich get
in,
richer. My God.
yes, on the yes, the defense. This
The defense is
defense,
going to be so good.
I'll cut to
They
the
might be the
chase
best in the
because
league.
the only thing that takes away from this is the offensive improvement. This defense, by talent alone, should be a top 3 defense in the NFL. They were
Right.
last season, and they got better. There's
Yeah.
this will be an exceptional defense. Uh, the problem is that their big weapon, off-season acquisition was Evan Ingram. I would, if people don't know, tight end from Jacksonville, and then they also get Trent Sherfield, the wide receiver from uh, the Vikings.
Meh.
Yeah,
That's
here's
the
here's
analysis. Meh.
and I'll go ahead and say right now, I give this offseason a B plus.
Sure.
And it's the offense that's dragging it down. And the big
Yeah.
reason is a lot of when I look at these playoff teams from the previous season, and I'm looking at their off season, a lot of the way that I look at it, and I know it's such a small sample size, but again, small sample size sport. I look at the last game of your season and I say, if you replayed that today, would the outcome have a greater chance to go in your favor? I don't know if it would with the Broncos getting smacked by the Bills. Because guess what?
Yeah.
That defense is still going to be a top three defense in the league. Even if it
Yeah.
slightly improves, the Broncos in that game had no weapons to make an impact against a defense that was above average. I mean, it wasn't great, it was above
Well,
average.
and we talked about their safeties last year, which were not a pretty
Yes,
picture.
yes, their safety duo with Tyler Rapp and DeMar Hamlin, the Bills this is, were the worst graded in coverage by PFF.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sean Payton's offensive scheme is going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting for the Broncos to make a noticeable improvement. I think that's why um, I actually I think that the Broncos and I this is getting ahead of ourselves in terms of season predictions, and my mind could change. The Broncos will more likely than not, very obviously, have a better season than the Raiders. I almost have, but like, I feel like the Raiders have a higher chance of winning the AFC West than the Broncos do. As weird and wild as that sounds, because I feel like there's such a ceiling on the Broncos offense. And I feel
Okay.
like the Raiders could just put together this weird offensive mishmash, but they have weapons. And that's why the run game has to kick it into gear with Hunter Harv or with RJ Harvey. Because if it doesn't, I'm looking at this wide receiver room and this weaponry, and I'm going, where else are you getting yards?
Yeah.
So yeah, B
Yeah.
plus for the Broncos.
Yeah, I think that's a fair grade. Um I guess there's a part of me that says that maybe like in terms of the offensive weapons, like maybe you could say that like I bet that move is based on a determination of where Bo Nix is at. Um Basically like, well, we think that Bo Nix can compensate, I guess, for the lack of weapons on the offense. I don't agree with that philosophy, but that's probably what the thought process was. Or there were just no guys that they were really excited about, I guess. I like the idea of leaning on your defense. I think that for a team like the Broncos, and I think that really any team that has a that are I guess like other than like contenders, you could say, I think that any team with a quarterback like Bo Nix, that should be their primary focus because
Yeah.
obviously like, and I think that there are so many examples, and I'm not gonna come up here and say that Bo Nix should be compared to Jalen Hurts, but Jalen Hurts is an example of that, where I think he's a great quarterback. But in terms of him compared to those top guys in the AFC that he could be content, or even, Jaden Daniels in the NFC, um, where you're comparing him to these types of quarterbacks where it just falls short. The Eagles have done an exceptional job with supplying a floor within their defense in order to elevate to them to heights that you wouldn't expect. To be fair, they also have the weapons, so I'm not going to say, right, like it's not a perfect comparison. But I guess what I'm saying is that when you have a team that's coming into their second year with their rookie quarterback, I don't know if the expectation necessarily is we have to win a Super Bowl and we have to make those big splash moves to get a weapon for Bo Nix. I think it makes a lot of sense to establish a floor for your already really good defense and then basically say that we're going to rely on that defense and we're going to see where we're at with Bo Nix and let him develop and then take care of those pieces later, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And to be clear, I actually agree with what you are saying almost entirely there.
Yeah.
The problem is just that I don't think it should be a choice between like I have to spend a first round pick on a wide receiver or bring in like or make an all in move to try and get like Tyreek Hill or Trent Sherfield.
Yeah,
Like
that's a good point.
I think you can. There's a middle ground there, but again, this was a good, close to great
Yes.
offseason.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the Indianapolis Colts. Um, Last year they went 8-9. I guess depending on who you talk to, that was like if you're talking to me, that was better than I would have expected. I think they definitely outperformed compared to what I expected from them. Um, but talking about, and I hate to do this because I feel like whenever we're talking about this, all we really discuss is quarterback. But obviously, the elephant in the room with the Indianapolis Colts is the Anthony Richardson situation. Just because you spent a third overall pick on him, like you just spent such a high pick on him that he really is kind of how you view your season for the next 5 years after you get a quarterback that high in the draft. Is dependent upon how that quarterback does and what you do to be able to maximize him.
It's completely
So I
reasonable.
wrote these notes about a week and a half ago, or about 2 weeks ago. This is what I said. They signed Daniel Jones. He was assigned as a backup, and I really like this. He's a solid insurance option if Anthony Richardson doesn't pan out and gets hurt. Well, here we are 2 weeks later, and Anthony Richardson is out indefinitely. He injured his shoulder, which is the same shoulder he injured, I believe, his rookie season, if that's the timeline right. If I get that mixed up, I'm sorry. He's been injured a lot. But basically, the idea behind the Daniel Jones pick, it was exactly what I just said. Like, it's just an insurance policy, right? It's just a solid backup that you can bring in. Just in case Anthony Richardson doesn't work out. And I think it was a fine move. They made a lot of moves on defense, specifically Tre'Davious Ward. Last year was a down year for him, especially after 2023 when he won second team All-Pro. But I still think that he has the juice in him. It's hard for me to evaluate a lot of the players on the 49ers just because I guess it just seems like such an organizational collapse that it's hard to say like how much of the fault is on this one player. It's hard for me to imagine that all of these amazing players just all of a sudden out of nowhere just stop being productive, if that makes sense.
We're going to look back in 5 years and it's almost going to be like uh, the scraps of the early 20s 49ers defense, which of those pieces panned out and which of them didn't. So like your Drake Greenlaws, your Hafungas, your Charvarius Wards, like what do they look like? Because they were such an incredible unit, and then you have
Right.
a monumental collapse last season based in large part to injury, but other factors as well. And now a huge chunk of that defense is scattered to the winds of free agency. And so I wouldn't, Charvarius Ward wouldn't be at the top of my list of being like a quality acquisition in the fallout of that
Sure.
free agency diaspora. But I mean, it's using fancy words, folks.
Yeah, I was like, all right, dude. Chill out, man. Diaspora over here.
The diaspora. I think that is what we're going to look at, the diaspora of the 2024 49ers defense. That's what happened.
I can see that like documentary right now.
Um, but yeah, Charvarius Ward.
That's it. Just tripped it.
I have mixed
Oh my
opinions
gosh.
on Ward. I mean, I
I think
don't
it's a
think
fine
that
pickup.
I don't think he deserved that second team All Pro 2 seasons ago. He's not as
Oh, okay.
bad as he was last season.
Yeah, I think he's firmly somewhere in the middle in actuality. So I think it's a fine pickup. Their secondary was not good last year, so it's just like, let's just sign some guys, right? Like, let's just get
I did
better.
not expect coming into this podcast we would be talking this long about Charvarius.
I know, for some reason we were. We have a lot of opinions on this guy. They also brought in Cameron
Ugh.
Bynum, just another solid pickup. Last year he had an okay year, nothing great. He's had better years, but it gives him stability at the safety position and gives them that veteran leadership. And I think that when you take into account who they hired as their defensive coordinator, veteran stability and leadership is super, super important for a team like the Colts. Last year, the Colts ranked 29th in total yards allowed, 26th against the pass, and 24th against the run. So obviously their defense was not good. On top of that, some other needs. The Colts have always, I feel like for at least the past 5 years, consistently had a good offensive line. They lost Ryan Kelly and Will Fries, who were really, really important. That's definitely a foundational blow. Assuming that Anthony Richardson was going to play, even though we don't really know what that situation looked like. They brought in Lou Anarumo, so that's who they hired as their defensive coordinator. Obviously, I'm very familiar with Lou Anarumo as he was the longtime defensive coordinator for the Bengals. I really like Lou Anarumo. I don't think that his defensive scheme and style was very well fit for the Bengals, but I think that it can work with the Colts given their new pickups. He has a very, very modern approach to his defense, and his flexibility is what really makes his defense stand out. And so with the help of those veteran pieces that they added, I think that we're going to see some improvement whenever it comes to those pieces. Lou Anarumo has this really interesting mix of all of the like new modern approaches to defense that you've seen. When it comes to his blitz packages, I'm not the biggest fan, and I feel like sometimes he does overcomplicate the game. Like, I just remember last year watching the Bengals and seeing like Trey Hendrickson out in pass coverage, and I'm just like, dude, you're doing too much. This is getting a little bit out of hand. Like, let's just calm down a bit. But when Lou Anarumo was at his best, the Bengals had Jesse Bates as their safety, Von Bell, Chidobe Awuzie, Mike Hilton, and even Eli Apple as their cornerback 3. And I bring that up to say that we saw with that type of veteran or of those just like veterans in their secondary, how effective a Lou Anarumo secondary can be. Right. I think last week, Jonathan called him the Patrick Mahomes stopper because of that AFC Championship win. That was like that game. I think you can attribute. Obviously, Joe Burrow stepped up and the offense carried, but like I think a large part of that win can be attributed to Lou Anarumo and the flexibility that he showed. Because basically, Lou Anarumo said, "We're gonna blitz nobody. We're gonna rush 3, put Sam Hubbard on a QB spy." And now it's your move, Andy Reid. And Andy Reid refused to go to the run game, and inevitably the Bengals won. And so it's the flexibility
it's one of the greatest halftime adjustments that I've ever seen made in a game with that high stakes.
Yeah, with that high stakes being down so much. And so, Lou Anarumo's defense can do pretty much anything. Like, he has the scheme within his bag in order to pull out all of the defensive coverages that you can imagine, all of the different blitz packages, even to an extent where sometimes you're like, okay, that's a little bit too much. Like, let's just stick back to the basics. If you watch last week's episode, one of the reasons why I said it was good that we let him go, the Bengals meaning, was because our secondary was just too young and inexperienced to be able to run such a high-level defensive scheme. I think the Colts are in a better position to be able to pull that off. And so that's why I think that this is a good, overall good signing for the Colts. I think Lou Anarumo deserves to be a defensive coordinator in the league. He just wasn't fit for where the Bengals were at currently within their roster construction. So I think that this is a great move.
Yep.
Next, looking at the draft, really the only guy that I'm going to point out is Tyler Warren, who is their first round pick. I think this is a good pick. I think that, obviously they need offensive weapons. And a lot of my analysis is catered to the concept that Anthony Richardson is going to start. But even if it's Daniel Jones, any quarterback within that, I guess, tier, which I think Daniel Jones is probably better than Anthony Richardson. But regardless of the fact, having a solid outlet player who can make moves after the catch and get open quickly is so important for a quarterback like that. And so, from the perspective of, because obviously when they picked him up, they had in mind that Anthony Richardson would be starting week 1, which he still could. Having him and picking him up was really, really important. Underrated. It's underrated in terms of how it impacts Anthony Richardson and his ability to play. So last year he had 104 receptions, 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, and plus 218 yards and 4 touchdowns rushing. So basically all that to say, he's a versatile do-it-all guy, and he's going to be a good weapon for whoever the quarterback is for the Colts, and a really, really good outlet guy, because especially for a guy like Anthony Richardson, where you worry about his injuries. So, which sucks for a guy like Anthony Richardson, who is just so athletic, because it's like you want to be able to use that mobility to your advantage. But on this other hand, look at all this injury history that tells you he needs to stay in the pocket and just deliver a pass without getting hit. But having a versatile weapon like that is just so important for those types of quarterbacks. Really, when I look at the Colts, I just feel like everything was just like, cool. Okay. Like, I think that if you were to look at their win total from last season into this upcoming season, it's probably going to be pretty similar, right? So anywhere between 8 to 9 wins would seem realistic to me. So I give them overall a C. I thought that they did what they were supposed to do. I think that their flexibility in terms of what they really can do is just so difficult when you have such a huge question mark at quarterback. Their ceiling is just going to be determined by their quarterback play and understanding exactly how far that can take them and what they have. Unfortunately, their head coach, Shane Steichen, he could be on the hot seat. He kind of was a little bit last year, but I think like there's the whole question mark of Anthony Richardson. Like, we haven't really even seen his production. I think his job might be dependent upon Richardson's play, which is not the type of security that most people would want in their job. But I think that they're just an unknown. It just depends on what kind of quarterback is Anthony Richardson. And when you have such a question mark at quarterback, it's just so hard to operate as a front office. And so I thought they did a decent job. I gave them a C. I don't think they got better. I don't think they got worse. They just don't know what they have, and it's just going to take time to figure that out.
Yeah, the one quick note that I'll give on the Colts, and it doesn't necessarily undercut what you were saying, but I thought that even pre-Richardson injury, and I know it's like, oh, sure you did. I promise. I thought, yeah, you take my word for it, I guess.
Please believe me.
Please believe me.
Promise, guys.
I thought Daniel Jones was going to be this team starter probably as soon as week 1, and I think Daniel Jones will. I think Daniel Jones will start the majority of this season. I think that this is more of a Daniel Jones season than a Richardson season, which means that your ceiling that you're looking at is like a miracle New York Giants run that Daniel Jones had, and sneaking in, because I mean the NFC is weak. It is. Or excuse me, the AFC, the AFC.
Yeah, I just agreed to you.
Sorry,
I just agreed with you without even thinking about it. I was like,
I
right,
just said the NFC. I meant the AFC South is weak, in my opinion. And we can talk about that a little bit more with the Texans, but it is weak.
I didn't even check you on that. You messed up twice, and I was just
you're blazing me like crazy, man. Goodness.
My bad.
I just say something blatantly wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. The NFC is terrible. Oh my gosh.
The Los Angeles Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers. We're moving on. It's on to LA. 11-6 with an embarrassing wild card loss to the Texans, where Justin Herbert threw more interceptions in that one game than he did the entirety of the NFL season. They were the 11th overall offense and the first overall defense. To be clear, when I say those numbers, those are by points per game. Let's be clear, and I'm not saying that the Chargers defense was actually bad. It was not as good as the first overall defense. Let's put it into some context. They were playing a last place schedule where their out of conference division that they played was the NFC South, and you toss into that games against the Browns and the Titans. Those types of teams are not going to score a lot of points against you. So they were absolutely a
They were frauds.
good to great defense. They were not the number one overall defense.
No,
That's the
man.
silliness of points per game. But Harbaugh's a floor raiser. In the NFL, your ceiling is determined by your quarterback. Justin Herbert can no longer be the, in a hypothetical situation, quarterback. He doesn't have any more excuses. So there were no major coaching changes this year. I have questions about Greg Roman, not about
Okay.
his ability to execute his scheme, but about the value of his scheme in utilizing Justin Herbert. Greg Roman is a great coach at executing his vision. Uh, does it actually benefit the Chargers to have that type of scheme? In their draft, they bring in Omarion Hampton, running back from North Carolina, considered by the majority of people to be the best non-Genty back in the draft. And I would agree. He's now a 1-2 punch with the Najee Harris signing in the offseason. Some people could say that that sort of diminishes the Najee Harris signing. In a Harbaugh offense, no, it really just kind of complements having two quality running backs. The question is just what's the value of spending a first round pick on a guy like that at that position? You bring in Trey Harris, wide receiver out of Ole Miss. He's a 6'2" target for Herbert to be able to hit, and he fills a pressing need outside in a very thin wide receiver room, but outside of Lad McConkey. Uh, and then
You're not moved by Quinton Johnson?
I'm moved. I'm moved to tears when I watch Quentin Johnson play the game of football. I no, to be clear, he elicits an emotional response. It's not a positive one, but and then lastly, I'll highlight Jamari Caldwell, defensive tackle out of Oregon. He's hopefully going to step up with their really bleeding talent at the defensive line, with Poona Ford and Morgan Fox being gone, who were their two starting defensive tackles last season. Uh, Free agency, bad.
All right, next team.
Um,
That's
uh,
it.
I just said, let's go through the losses. Poona Ford, defensive tackle, gone to the Rams. Morgan Fox, defensive tackle, gone to the Falcons. Josh Palmer, wide receiver, gone to the Bills. Christian Fulton, cornerback, gone to the Chiefs. Joey Bosa, edge, gone to the Bills. They lost a lot of talent. And I know none of
Yeah.
those names outside of maybe Joey Bosa just because he has a brother who's better than he is. Uh, that was there was some emotion behind that came out. I would like to apologize to the Bosa family. There must
Mrs.
have been something
Bosa,
that
we're sorry.
Mrs. Bosa, I'm so sorry. That was hatred that just came out of my heart. That was evil.
Nose there.
It's a blind spot for me, I suppose.
Anyway, true,
Yeah.
but
Big nose Bosa out of there.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
And then they like I already mentioned, they snagged Najee Harris, who it's a
Hmm.
Harbaugh offense. A piece like Najee Harris is valuable. But again, I go back to the question, in a Harbaugh and Greg Roman scheme, are those actually the best schemes to increase your ceiling? They increase your floor, sure. But we're at the point with the Chargers as a franchise and where Justin Herbert is at in his career that we can't talk any longer about raising the floor. It has to be maximizing what the ceiling is. Uh, and then Mekhi Becton is probably their most impactful offseason signing stealing him over from the Eagles, where he revived his career in Philadelphia after injury-riddled time with the Jets. Um, not it doesn't make up for the loss of talent.
Mm-mm.
And I like the draft. Again, as I've said multiple times, I like all of these AFC West drafts. I can't like a draft enough to compensate for how much talent was lost when I don't think that there was a talent that could afford to be lost. It's a C minus off season. I have no reason to believe that this team won't go 11-6 or even back down to 10-7 and lose in the wild card round again. I don't see the vision beyond just hypothetically assuming year two for Harbaugh with Herbert. The problem is that it wasn't like the Harbaugh system and the Greg Roman system squeezed the most that it could have, it seems like, out of Herbert last season. Not a lot of offensive production, but low turnovers, and you win a lot of games. But I don't see how it's like, I don't see the room to improve overvaluing the talent that was lost. So yeah,
Well, and
it was a poor off season.
I think, and I might even go as so far as to say that they're going to miss the playoffs next year. I think
I
that they
yeah.
might they could sneak in just because of the lack of talent, I guess you could say, within the AFC. Like I think that there are some divisions that realistically could just have one team. And so, like, it wouldn't surprise me if, like, there's one team from the South, one team from the East, unless the Patriots, like we talked about last week, kind of go crazy with their easy schedule. But one team, and then, three teams from, or sorry, two teams from one, either the AFC North or the AFC West, and then three teams from the other. So
Yeah,
it's,
I think that the, it's simplistic analysis, but I don't think that some people realize it enough. Your schedule matters in the NFL. You play
oh,
17 games.
100% does.
The Chargers played a last place schedule with a
Yeah.
very favorable division matchup. They're playing a second place schedule now. It's going to be tougher. And so even if you build in some room for improvement with Herbert and Harbaugh, I I don't see it outweighing the other
It's just
factors now
like the
working
thing that
against
you
them.
said that I think was the most impactful, which is nothing against Harbaugh, but how much can he maximize a quarterback in the NFL? Like, what's the sample size that we've seen in terms of
Now you're asking the real questions
in
that
terms of the
people are
quarterbacks that
afraid to
he's coached?
discuss. Yeah.
Because, like obviously, I just think that he needs a Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen style offensive coordinator. Like he
But
needs
the
the type of
problem is that
offensive coordinator.
he can't help but put his stylistic fingerprints
True.
onto the offense.
True. That's true. I just feel like maybe if he had someone like that, maybe they would be able to come to some sort of middle ground related to the run game and the pass game. Because I also think that, like, with Herbert's injury history, it makes sense to kind of, I guess you could say, minimize. I don't want to say minimize, but that's the only word I can think of. But minimize his role in favor of an effective run game and use him in very specific smart situations in order to limit his potential risk for injury. Like I think that could make sense as a scheme. I don't think that's the main motivation behind. Obviously, it's a Harbaugh thing. Um,
And Harbaugh's weird too from like a league perception because and I have nothing against him personally, obviously.
yeah,
Like but he weirdly appeals to both ends of this like he appeals to the football traditionalists and the progressives, and then I'm here stuck in the middle being like, cool, you have a 400-pound fullback. Like fun, man. That's what I'm gonna remember. Like at this point, when we look back on it, is that what we're gonna remember from this era? Is like, wow, Harbaugh, he was having fun at the fullback position. He really ran the ball. It's like, but But it's not even that because we're in the revival of the running back with Saquon Barkley and and Christian McCaffrey before him and Derrick Henry being father time. And it's like cool, a Harbaugh and Greg Roman offense. The biggest compliment I'll give is that it's a very consistent style. The problem is that it's not a style that, and this is just me personally, that I enjoy watching. I
Sure.
don't. Defensively, it is a quality defensive scheme and enjoyable. I offensively, I can't say it. I feel bad for Justin Herbert being stuck in this position.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of more on in I just think that you have to have both. I think that you need a solid run game and a solid pass game. And we've seen the woes of teams that aren't able to commit, and we've seen the successes of teams that are able to commit. I think the basic, obviously, like you talked about the example of Harbaugh and just the limitation of an offense that is so dependent upon the run game. The example, we talked about it earlier, the example that I would use for a team that's too dependent on the pass game would be the Chiefs in that AFC Championship game. Although I think that was more of just like a stylistic Andy Reid said, we are going to win through Patrick Mahomes no matter what. And then even the Bengals, that is something that worries me. I think that I'm actually excited because I think that they're going to be better. They found a more foundational piece in Chase Brown, but just you have to be able to have a mix because the truth is that you can, as a defense, adapt to either style. And you have to be, the most successful offenses around the league last year were able to, in large part, adapt to whatever the defense was doing to be able to run the ball and pass the ball in a balanced approach.
No,
That's the problem
you
with
have to have
Harbaugh's team.
you have to have a quarterback that's like a Mount Rushmore level all time quarterback to be able to overcome that, like a
Yeah.
Mahomes in, you know, the first few years of his career.
Yeah. Well, and I'll even say this, one thing about Andy Reid, you know what he did immediately after that AFC championship? He increased the amount of times that they ran the ball significantly.
Too much.
Significantly.
Too
Yeah,
much, in my
almost too
opinion.
much. Exactly.
He
He almost
overcompensated.
overcorrected.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's
And
just
it did
I
finally
don't
catch
think
up
that's
to be
something
clear.
Harbaugh will
He
do.
he overcompensated his way into winning back-to-back Super Bowls. But so it's not that it was unsuccessful, but I think that many Chiefs fans would say you'd probably get away with running the ball like 15% less,
Well,
especially if we're not going to have a running back that has like a 15-yard rush the entire season.
sure. I think that you also have to consider defense whenever you're talking about that conversation. But the point that I'm making here is that I just don't know if Harbaugh's. I agree with you. I agree. I think that Harbaugh's offensive approach is not going to maximize Herbert, which is really, really unfortunate because, like I said before, I think that he's a really solid quarterback. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think that C minus, that's what you gave them, right?
Yep.
Like, I think if I were grading them, I would have went a little bit closer to D because I think that I don't think they got better. I think they got worse. And on top of that, with their schedule, it's just not going to be a good time.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to the Tennessee Titans. So obviously the Tennessee Titans were the worst team in the NFL last season. They went 3-14 and had the number one overall pick. So when you ask what is the thing that they needed the most, they needed a quarterback. One of my favorite, I guess you could say, memes of the NFL season last year were all of those Will Levis moments.
Yep.
Which this is really funny, but I was so high on Will Levis, and I'll tell you why. Believe it or not, there was a point where I really liked Will Levis. Me and my dad were watching, I want to say it was Sunday Night Football, and we really did not care. I think the Bengals probably lost, and we were just pissed off about it. So we were watching Sunday Night Football, and it was the Dolphins when they were decent, and the Tennessee Titans playing, led by Will Levis. And just watching him play was so much fun. They were down by a few touchdowns. They made a miraculous comeback. I think they won in overtime. And just watching him play, it was just so enjoyable to watch this style of like, it kind of reminded me of Baker Mayfield, which is why I love Baker Mayfield, because I just love that style of play. I love that hard nose, put your foot on your opponent's throat, and you're just gonna, force yourself to this win. Yeah, that was obviously a small sample size. And so Will Levis since then has not been entirely successful. Maybe I jumped the gun in terms of how I view Will Levis after that game. So clearly they needed a quarterback. Go ahead.
No,
Were you going to say something?
You might have jumped the gun.
Yeah, I might have jumped the gun a little bit. They needed a better offensive line, as most teams, it seems like, who are bad do. They allowed they were 30th in sacks rate last year, and 23rd in pressure rate. So they needed some improvement. They needed some receiver help, just more consistency outside of Calvin Ridley. It seems like the Titans are just where, like historic wide receivers go to die, like especially in recent years. And they really just needed a defensive identity. So in terms of offseason acquisitions, they got Tyler Lockett. I think he's underrated and a really solid option for QB Cam Ward. I just like bringing in the veteran presence there. And just like that reliability. Last year he had 49 catches for 600 yards, but he only had 3 drops. And so it's not a stat line that will kind of scream out at you, but I just think that was a solid pickup. They brought in Van Jefferson. Cool. And then they also brought in Dan Moore Jr. So he kind of had an underrated season last year. His numbers don't look the best, but I think you have to take into account that he was playing for the Steelers, which means he was going against, I guess you could say, the entire unit that is the Ravens defensive line, Trey Hendrickson and Myles Garrett. And so when you take those games out, he had a very good season last year. You shouldn't take those games out, because when you're talking about 17 games and you take out 6,
I get what you mean. I get what you mean. He was going up against an imbalanced quality of talent.
Sure. Way to clarify that for me. Right. Imbalanced? Is imbalanced a word? Am I crazy?
Yes.
No way. Google that. I don't buy it. Okay, but they got Dan Moore. But yeah, like it was unproportional in terms of like the top end level of talent that he was playing against. They also brought in Kevin Zeitler, who's a really
word.
Oh, I thought you said imbalanced, like IN balanced.
No.
I was like, what is
All right, I'll shut up.
My bad, dude. Okay, they brought in Zeitler, really good offensive guard. So yeah, I think they made some improvements in the offensive line. So that's going to be very, very helpful. Now let's just talk about the draft, right? They got Cam Ward. He was taken number 1 overall. And I think that this offseason is just going to be determined by how he turns out. And that's probably going to be true for the off seasons, for a few off seasons ahead.
Yeah, no one ever looks back at a team that had an off season where they drafted a number 1 overall quarterback to anything other than how that quarterback performed. That's the entire determining factor here.
Yeah. And so Cam Ward is just so confusing for me to analyze and understand and project.
Were you grinding the tape?
I was.
It's interesting. It's interesting tape.
It's so interesting. So last year in college football, I watched Cam Ward a lot because I thought he was really fun to watch. And so I saw that, and then I kind of like, in doing research for this, I kind of relooked at it. He just has some of the craziest, most amazing plays. And then he'll follow it up with the craziest, most terrible plays you've ever seen. On top of that, he's this weird dichotomy where all of his biggest strengths are also all of his biggest weaknesses. Like,
That's a
I
good way
think
of
when
putting
you
it.
watch, yeah, like when you watch Cam Ward last year, you look at a guy that looks like he's playing in slow motion. He's just so nonchalant. He looks like he's making it look easy. And when he's making the plays that you want him to, when he's making the right decision and sidearming it for a 50-yard dot in the middle of the field, you're like, holy crap, this guy is the future. You're looking at a Heisman winner. You're looking at the next great NFL quarterback.
The
But on the
last
other
collegiate
hand,
quarterback that I would say he reminded, not stylistically whatsoever, but just in that essence that you described, it is similar to, and this is obviously a compliment, potentially, Lamar Jackson, in the sense
mm,
that when he's at his best at the collegiate level, he's operating at such a different speed
yeah,
where it's almost hard to judge, like, because there's some plays where it's like he makes it look so easy that it almost seems like he's not trying.
exactly.
That's the
That's
best
exactly
way
what it
that I
looks
could
like.
describe it.
He's just standing there, and then he just casually, without moving his feet at all, slings a 50-yard dart in the middle of the field. And you're like, well, that was kind of awesome. But then he
Yeah.
also takes that technique into a play where maybe no one's open and he slings it anyway, or he's looking the other direction and he slings it anyway. And it's like, well, that didn't look really good. And so when you look at him, it's just hard to understand exactly what level of his game is going to come out. Last year, he obviously had a great season. He had 4,300 yards passing, 39 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 67.4% completion rate, and 9.6 yards per attempt. So he had a great season, right? His wins above average last year was 1.22. This is a strong number for a college quarterback. For those of you who don't know, wins above average is an estimate of how many wins a quarterback adds above a replacement level baseline average quarterback. So it looks into like clutch play, efficiency, overall value, those types of things. His strengths, he's really good at throwing the deep ball. He leaves wide receivers across the middle of the field. He's great anticipation, and he throws guys open in rhythm. The concern when he does all those things, sometimes the ball does not go where he wants it to go. And that's why I
Yes.
say like his biggest strengths are his biggest weaknesses. His throwing form is very inconsistent. So that idea
That's
of,
the
look, he's
thing, is
playing in
it's
slow.
hard to judge his decision making
Right.
because the decisions that he makes that turn into incredible plays and terrible plays are the exact same
They're the
decisions.
exact same. And that's why it's like, so normally when you see a guy like that and you're like, he's playing in slow motion, look how quickly he's processing the game, you would immediately point to and say, look at his decision making, look how great it is. But you can't necessarily say that because of the other end of the spectrum where his lowlights exist. So it's like, is this a question of accuracy? Is this a question of decision making? Is it a mixture of both? I think that's probably what it is. But his throwing form is so inconsistent. So again, when you see him playing slow motion and you see him just kind of walking around nonchalantly and then just side arming it for a million yards, maybe that can work in college when you have one of the best offensive lines in the in the league. But how effective is that type of style of quarterbacking going to work in an NFL?
And
Um,
another factor to note based on college ball, and I get that a lot of what we're saying could come off as negative. I'm not saying that I'm out or I don't believe in Cam Ward, but because I'm a fan of a team that's in the ACC, Louisville, so we're a Power Four team, but also going up against ACC defenses and ACC pass rushes, it isn't the same pedigree as SEC or Big Ten defenses and secondaries and pass rushes.
uh,
So, and to be clear, there are so many quarterbacks that haven't come from the Power Two college football conferences that have worked out.
right.
Lamar Jackson being just one example, even though they're
Patrick
stylistically
Mahomes,
different. Patrick Mahomes. So
he was at
that's
Texas
not
Tech.
Texas Tech. It's not that um, it automatically means something. It just means that it is a question mark because when you're playing an NFL defense, the the
Speed.
radius or the diameter or
Yeah.
whatever mathematical term that you want to use of the window that you have to place the football in shrinks
Yes.
massively. And so you cannot afford like a football that's a foot and a half off course in an against an ACC difference or ACC defense is going to have a lot more of a negative impact when you're going up against an NFL defense. It just is.
Yes. Absolutely. And so, yeah, it's just tough. And here's another example. He's a mobile quarterback who looks to the pass first. We talked about this a while ago with some of our short form content. This is really awesome. It's one of the reasons why I love Jaden Daniels so much.
Yep.
The problem, he holds onto the ball too much. His pressure sack rate was 15.8%, which is high for a mobile quarterback. That's really high for a mobile quarterback like him, or really any quarterback.
Now, part of that can be uh, when you're at the college game, I will to make an excuse for him because in a college game, he's having to, in a sense, even though the defenses are obviously going to be worse than an NFL defense, this goes without saying, he's having to try harder and make decisions that he wouldn't typically have to make in an NFL scenario. So he's holding on to the ball longer than he potentially actually will in the NFL. Not necessarily, but that would be the excuse that I would make.
Sure. And I would say the problem is his offensive line was so good last year. And this is the problem that I'm seeing with Cam Ward, is that when you have an offensive line like that, there are disadvantages, or I guess mistakes and bad habits that you can have that will still lead to winning football. But when you're going against an NFL pass rush with a Tennessee Titans offensive line, you don't have that large of a margin for error. So the question is with Cam Ward is, can he figure out the mechanics? Can he fix his decision making and his accuracy? And will this style of play be able to translate within the NFL? This is one of those picks where I think the ceiling is really, really high and the floor is really, really low. Like, I think this could be a situation where we look back and we look at Cam Ward and say that he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I also think that he won't get a second contract. I think that both of those options are within the realm of possibility when I look at Cam Ward. Because again, his highs are incredibly high. His lows are incredibly low. And so that kind of makes it tough when you're grading the Titans, because I think for a team that clearly needed a quarterback, he was the best option within this draft.
So basically, what you're saying is that the grade is either an A or a D minus, and pick your poison.
Or like, yeah, exactly. So I gave them a C. I just gave them right in the middle.
C plus, C plus.
Okay, C plus. To be specific, just because he's just so like, I genuinely did enjoy watching film on him, because I felt like I was trying to watch. It was like trying to solve a complex riddle. Like trying to figure out, like, is this going to translate in the NFL? Because some of the stuff he's doing is just so impressive, but also just so silly. Where it's like, can this level of just like ridiculous, nonchalant play actually translate as the game speeds up?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Because, like, man, he just has so many incredible passes, especially over the middle of the field, in anticipation timing passes, where he's just standing there nonchalantly, doesn't really get his feet set, and just like slings it. And it's just a dart right into the guy's hand. And then other plays where he's, again, nonchalant, holding onto the ball, and he throws it into triple coverage. And you're like, this doesn't even look like the same quarterback that I just saw four plays ago. Like, what is going on? So yeah, because of just the highs and the lows of Cam Ward, I give this offseason a C plus.
All righty. The Kansas City Chiefs.
Boo.
America's football team.
All right, bud. All right,
It
pal.
is, it is, folks. I'm here to tell you, it's America's team. Uh, 15-2, really 15-1. The week 18 to the Broncos. Well, it's
All
a
right.
fact. We played our third strings, and a loss in the Super Bowl. Oh, I bet you all were so happy. The 15th overall offense and the 4th overall defense. I know that people want to hate on the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, and I've accepted that. I know people like to view the Super Bowl loss as the end of a dynasty, but we're at the point now where each season for the Chiefs is like the chapter in the greatest story ever written.
Okay.
And, and this chapter was a season where Mahomes proved that he is the most clutch player in the NFL. He led the league in fourth quarter comebacks and game winning drives. In fact, I believe he tied the NFL record for both of those. Um, and this is a season where he did so with basically no left tackle, without a wide receiver one, and without his wide receiver run for the entirety of the season post week 5, and without his wide receiver two for the majority of the season. Kelsey's first season where he really started to look like he was aging. And they lost 2 games all season that they were trying to win, that Mahomes was playing, to the Bills, who they then eliminated in the playoffs for the 4th time in 5 years, and then in the Super Bowl to the Eagles. That was the season for the Chiefs. We're at the point now where the Chiefs in the Mahomes era have a 2-game season. The season starts in the AFC Championship game. That's where we're at now. That's literally the history of Patrick Mahomes. And so that's the precedent and the context behind how I have to grade this team's offseason. And I'm going to grade so in a very non-biased way, as biased as that monologue just was.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, okay, yeah, right, man.
The coaching staff, it's the same staff on pretty much every level across the board. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We can have the Matt Nagy, Eric Bieniemy
I was just about to
discussions,
bring him up.
but I think people, because it's a correlation causation thing where people are all of a sudden be like, how much impact does Andy Reid have on the offense? It's like, this is Andy Reid's offense at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Eric Bieniemy was probably a better presence to have on the team than Matt Nagy. That's not the answer to why the offense has looked quote unquote worse over the last couple of seasons. Let's look at the draft. Josh Simmons, left tackle out of Ohio State. He was the best tackle in the draft. And that's something that the experts will say, even though he wasn't drafted as tackle one. The reason was just injury concern and apparently a small bit of character concern that wasn't really ever publicly talked about. I had to dive pretty deep, and I found some stuff about that. If Simmons pans out, he is Mahomes' left tackle for the rest of Mahomes' career. That is the ceiling here. And so to take a swing at a guy like that, I have no problem with whatsoever.
Yeah.
Ashton Gelati, defensive end out of Louisville. This is the most hyped I've been about a second day or later Chiefs pick in a long, long time. I'm obviously biased because he's out of Louisville, but this
Right.
guy is a stud.
Whenever he was drafted, I immediately remembered there was this time, it was like a year and a half ago, I think, where we were hanging out and we were watching Louisville play. And we were like 5 minutes into it. They were on defense. And I just remember seeing like, is that guy's name Gelati? Like, he's really good. And you were like, that guy's going to be playing on Sunday. And I immediately thought about that conversation whenever he
Yes,
got drafted. I was like, oh
he's
my gosh, look.
and the thing
Good
is
for
here too,
Jonathan.
what I appreciate it, man. Whether you want to talk about what his individual ceiling is, to be clear, as quality as this defense has been, George Karlaftis has been the only edge player that has consistently produced for the Chiefs whatsoever in the last 2 seasons. To be clear,
Yeah.
I mean edge. Chris Jones obviously playing interior defensive line. So he's going to immediately be able to come in. I'm not saying week 1, but by the time we get, past the bye week, he's going to be in a position where he's getting probably more snaps on the field than off the field, in my opinion. So yeah, and then Noah Williams, quarterback out of or cornerback out of Cal. The Chiefs develop corners. That's what they do. So
They
I'm
do.
at the point where, I mean, this is a later round draft pick. I'm not going to have some crazy insight onto Noel Williams, but I'm at the point where I fully trust the Chiefs
Mhm.
to be able to
Right.
draft and develop their secondary. So it's a quality draft. It's a good draft, and I've said that about every AFC West draft. Um, Free agency is where we get into legitimately the reason why ultimately I'm going to give this offseason a B, just a straight B. The Chiefs lost some quality talent. Joe Tooney is the highlight there, guard to the
Yeah.
Bears. Now, I think some people uh, have somewhat overhyped, like now it's this massive hole. Kingsley Suamataia, our left tackle that we drafted last season, who performed atrociously at left tackle, he's going to be moved into guard, and he will be a competent guard. So it's not that he's going to be a new Joe Tooney, but people are acting like all of a sudden now there's this hole at guard, which I really don't think that there's going to be. It's just that Joe Tooney is an amazing player.
What
Justin
makes you
Reed,
think that? I'm curious that
well,
he's going to come in and play guard and be competent.
I just think that that's the history of guys that you take at left tackle in the NFL. They don't pan out. You convert them to a guard.
Hmm.
No, I
Okay.
mean, and no offense to guard. And again, I'm using a lot of NFL stereotypes, but no offense to guards as a position, that's what happens. You don't pan out at left
Yeah.
tackle as a high quality draft pick. You get put at guard. So,
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's dependent upon Simmons. I think it's really, really dependent upon him. I think that if Simmons is solid, that allows for um, Creed Humphrey to be able to, yeah, exactly, to make up for that. If Josh Simmons isn't, then everyone's gonna have to cheat, and that's gonna put. I don't even want to try to pronounce his name because every time I try, I completely fail. Say it again.
last name Suamataia.
Yeah, Suamataia. Did I say it right? Look,
Yeah.
Suamataia. If Simmons is good, then I think that again, Creed Humphrey is going to be able to make up for a lot of the lack of competency within the guard position at whatever way that goes. If he's not, then it kind of leans on Suamataia to make up for the lack of competency at the left tackle position.
Yeah.
And that then kind of leads Creed Humphrey to be on an island. I just think that it really is going to depend upon how those two guys mesh. And so that's why it's like, I asked why you've, like, what's your reasoning behind that?
Yeah.
I think it's more likely than not because when I look at the film of Josh Simmons, I really like what I see. He's a really, really solid tackle.
And to
I
be
wouldn't know
clear,
if I wouldn't say he's better. He's the number one tackle in the draft, considering Will Campbell. But I think he's number two. And so, that being said, when it comes to the Chiefs' offensive line, I think that you have enough pieces, specifically Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, that if you can just attain some sort of baseline competency, that they're going to be able to make up for the difference. That will lead to a better offensive line as a whole. Although that
yeah.
being said, if you take out the Super Bowl, the Chiefs' offensive line really wasn't as bad from the numbers as a lot of people think.
Well, no, it's also not. I mean, it was literally just entirely left tackle. I mean, that's what
Yeah,
it was.
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
literally, I believe going into I think once we got to the playoffs, they might have given up a couple. Literally going into the playoffs, the interior offensive line of the Chiefs didn't give up a single sack all season.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
single Chief sack was on either some combination of whoever we were playing at left tackle or
And Quan Taylor.
Jawan Taylor, who
Yeah.
is one of those
Wah,
people who he
wah.
gets over. He's overrated and underrated at the same time, and he gets hated on too much, and sometimes
No, he
not hated
doesn't.
on enough.
Yeah, he gets hated on perfectly.
Uh,
Like, he should
Justin
get hated
Reed.
on.
Just going through some more of the losses really quick. Lost
Yeah.
Justin Reed's the safety to the Saints. Justin Watson. I know people are going to be like, Justin Watson is going to be one of those wide receivers who the entirety of his Pro Football Reference page at the end of his career is going to be entirely based on just his run with the Chiefs. But Justin Watson, clutch plays. I mean,
He really is. He was like their deep ball threat for a little bit there.
Yes, and not just last season. For multiple seasons, it would be it would be 3rd and 12. Who are we going to go to? Travis Kelce or Justin Watson? Just
let's
for
go.
some insight into the Chiefs wide receiver room. And then Samaje Perine, who's Andy Reid's beloved gadget back. Game-clinching play of the AFC Championship game.
Oh my gosh, he's my GOAT, dude.
I love Samaje. This is Samaje Perine, friend of the show.
he's a big friend of the show. He's on the Bengals now, which is huge.
Yeah.
Just completely changed the trajectory of our season.
We just had the whole Chiefs offensive line discussion talking about Josh Simmons. We can't overlook the fact that we also paid big money. I just used we. I was trying not to use we when talking about the Chiefs. My bias is showing. Jalen Moore. And people are like, why are you paying that much money to a backup left tackle? He was the backup to arguably the greatest left tackle in NFL history, Trent Williams. So I think that, like, relative to who you can be a backup to, that might be the worst possible position that you could be in. Outside of Trent Williams getting injured, and then the tape that he put out there was quality enough for the Chiefs to pay him money. People could say the Simmons pick makes it less valuable, but when it was literally the biggest problem with your team last offseason, I'm fine with taking 2 swings.
Yeah.
So, Christian Fulton.
In fact, I would go so far as to say if they didn't take 2 swings, it was a failed offseason. Like, the 2 is the minimum they needed to take.
Yes, 1,000%, yes. Christian Fulton, cornerback, snagging him from the Chargers, bringing him in, adding some depth there. And then the reason why I was almost close to giving this a B+ offseason was because outside of Joe Thuney, I was expecting to lose far more in free agency. We re-signed Nick Bolton, Trey Smith, Charles Omenihu, Hollywood Brown, and Kareem Hunt. We signed kind of a big drop-off between Brown and Hunt, but there were some valuable re-signings here. I really didn't believe that we would be able to keep both Omenihu and Bolton. And that's going to be really critical to preserving the defensive integrity.
Omenihu is such a playoff riser. He's such a playoff riser. It's ridiculous.
So underrated. So I'm hovering between a B and a B+ for this offseason. It's not a great offseason because the lack of weapons being brought in and the offseason losses in free agency diminish it. But the fact that the losses were not as great as many people were expecting, and the fact that I think it's a quality draft, and you also just have to keep it in perspective too of even when talking about bringing in weapons, so many weapons for the Chiefs were injured last season. So you have to look at this in the context of you're almost signing Hollywood Brown this season. Like, I get he played some in the playoffs, but you're basically just, like, he broke his collarbone in the first play of preseason, and he was done for. So, I mean, he basically didn't play whatsoever. And then Rashee Rice, there's the suspension potentially looming, who knows. But Rashee Rice was on pace for, I believe, 1,500 receiving yards.
Yeah, Rashee Rice is such an I feel like people forgot about him. He is the consistent weapon for Patrick Mahomes.
No, and that's the thing. And stylistically, he is what the goal is. Even though they play an entirely different position, and you're never going to be able to replace the greatest tight end of all time, Travis Kelce. But Rashee Rice actually feels the same security blanket type of role. Crossing routes, midfield, check down. Like, he's not going up to get the deep ball, but he's basically someone who, if
Yes.
he builds up enough of a rapport with Mahomes, he can constantly be there as someone who Mahomes is through his first two reads.
Yeah.
It's not available. I pan back to Rashid. He's right there.
I've never, the last time I saw a slant be more effective or as effective within the NFL was watching Tom Brady and like Julian Edelman, where it was just like,
Yeah.
why is that always open? Like,
Yeah.
this is like they
Trust
are
me,
just going straight and turning right.
I watched the 2018 AFC Championship with my own two eyes in Arrowhead. I saw when the Tom Brady, slant game was in full effect, and it was brutal to watch. But that's the vision. That's the vision of Rashee Rice and Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
unrelenting.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think that when you look at the Chiefs, like again, you have to take into account their expectations. They're not the team that you expect to make those big moves to put them into contention. They're always going to be in contention. And so the question is just like, can you keep the same level of stability that you've had for the past 5 years? They did exactly that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the Houston Texans. This is the last team we're gonna grade, and I'm gonna make it really quick because, like we kind of alluded to before, everything when it comes to the Houston Texans is related to their offensive line. Last year, they had the worst offensive line in the league. I'll get to that later, but first let's talk about some of the offseason moves. So obviously they got rid of Laramie Tunsil. They traded him because they didn't want to pay him because they're cheap. They signed Cam Robinson in order to replace him. Robinson last year ranked 25th in pass block win rate and 45th in run block win rate among tackles. He allowed the third highest pressure rate among left tackles with at least 500
did you say 45th?
blocking snaps. Yeah, in one run block win percentage among tackles. Third highest pass pressure rate amongst left tackles. He gave up the fourth most amount of sacks. He gave up 9 sacks last year independently. That's their guy to replace Laramie Tunsil, who, by the way, Laramie Tunsil last year was the only offensive lineman on the Texans who had a grade above 70%, according to PFF. They had a clear weakness, just like the Chiefs. It was their offensive line, and their guy to replace their best player is not good. On top of that, they also got Lincoln Tomlinson, who's a little bit better, but he also allowed the 6th highest pressure rate among all left guards and 11 sacks last year. They added some depth at the end. They re-signed some of their important defenders. They brought back Sheldon Rankins, but I want to talk a little bit about the offensive line last year and some advanced stats. So according to Pro Football Network, the Texans had the worst offensive line in the league last year. Last year, CJ Stroud's time to throw was 3 seconds, which ranks 28th in the league. His sack rate when blitzed was 10.7%. That's 27th in the league. Pressure rate allowed versus 4 or fewer pass rushers. Again, let me say this again. Pressure rate allowed versus 4 or fewer pass rushers was 35.2% for the whole entire year. That's 25th in the NFL. Their run block yards per carry run block yards before contact per rush was 0.58 seconds, which is 31st in the league. So basically that's looking at how long does it take before you as a running back make contact with a defender on run plays. They were the 31st worst in the league.
I'll let you keep cooking. And to be clear, this means that obviously terrible for the Texans. This only increases my opinion of CJ Stroud.
Yeah, this also increases my opinion on Joe Mixon. To be fair.
Yeah.
So before, when I was saying like Joe Mixon's kind of underrated, this is why. And then their run block win rate was 31st in the NFL. This is why Joe Mixon, again, surprisingly had a really solid production. And this is why I'm going to ultimately give them a D. They had one job. They have one job. It's to maximize CJ Stroud. they can no longer, I feel like if you're into basketball, I kind of feel like the last two seasons was the Kings a few years ago, where they were like this fun team that was coming up. And, they kind of, I think they got second in the Western Conference.
You
This is
piqued
how
my
I feel about the
interest with
Texans.
this NBA analogy. It's not bad.
Exactly.
I think I
Yeah.
agree.
Well, this is how it feels. This is how I feel like this is going to end up with the Texans. They're a team that historically has not been good. They brought in CJ Stroud, who was their savior. They've now had two playoff runs, and the first season, I would say, arguably was better than the first, especially when you look at CJ Stroud. And now they're not doing any of the things they need to be doing in order to push them farther in that direction. Last year, CJ Stroud had a down year compared to his rookie season. Now, there is a lot of analysis related to, just should a lot of those passes been completions, or should a lot of those errant balls been interceptions? And there's advanced metrics to kind of say that CJ Stroud lies directly in the middle of his rookie and sophomore season. But again, I cannot understate the value of a solid offensive line when it comes to the development of a young quarterback. That needs to be the priority for a team like the Texans, and they have failed at every front when it comes to this. In terms of coaching changes, D'Amico Ryans hired a new coach, Nick Caley. He was previously an assistant with the Rams, again part of Sean McVay's coaching tree. He replaces Bobby Slowick, who had a pretty bad season with the Texans in 2024. I even read this article saying that there was a leak of a player who said that Slowick is the reason why Stroud had a bad year. I'll give you three guesses who that player probably was. I have some opinions about a guy who is pretty outspoken to the media about locker room, I guess, drama that's going on.
The thing is though, what he said was this quote before or after the player that we're insinuating was traded or was acquired elsewhere.
No, I'm thinking it's Joe. Wait, who are you thinking? Are you thinking
Diggs.
Tunsil? Oh no. Oh, I was thinking Mixon. Oh, it totally could have been Stephon Diggs though. Yeah, I don't know. I think it was a mix of guys though. Like the report that I was reading was talking about
Comment
like
below what Texans players you think it was. What Texans player do you think was dunking on Bobby Sloan? I have my theories.
Anyway, so basically the idea is that Slowick's scheme just didn't flex around Stroud, and that was a problem even when it comes to his rookie season, and it just didn't provide a solid offensive identity. This is actually a quote from the player. They also, or from the article, they said they also blamed him for making Stroud adapt to his offense instead of letting him play naturally. So, I think Nick Caley will probably do a better job than Slowick. But again, it's like if you don't have a solid offensive line, what hope is there for any young quarterback or offensive coordinator? So, because Stroud last year had one of the steepest declines of any Texas player. His completion percentage was relatively the same, but it's really when you look at interceptions, it went from 5 his rookie season to 12 his second season. He had 3 less touchdowns and about 400 less passing yards. So we'll see how that works, but really it remains a question mark. They got Jaden Higgs in the draft, wide receiver from Iowa. Cool. I think that this makes a lot of sense given Tank Dell's injury situation, Stephon Diggs' departure. I think he'll be a solid piece for them. They also got an offensive lineman from Minnesota, Ursi. Again, cool. I don't know if he's going to be a starter week 1, although he might just because of how weak that offensive line is.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I give them a D. I think that, again, when you are a team with a young quarterback who you're trying to develop, you have to focus in on maximizing his potential. They did not do that. They did the opposite of that, in fact. And I think that they could sneak into the playoffs again. They probably will, just because of how weak their division is.
Yeah.
But just in terms of direction, it just seems so promising. Obviously 2 years ago, and then even last year. But then when you look at the offseason, it's like you just have not made the right moves. And I know you still have all of those pieces, right? You still have a lot. You still have Tank Dell, right? You still have Nico Collins. You still have Joe Mixon. You still have Schultz. You still have CJ Stroud. You still have all those defenders that make them so good. But you have to be focusing on maximizing the ceiling of CJ Stroud for the future, right? Like all of those players are great for right now. But if you're a team that wants to eventually be competing for Super Bowls, the only realistic way that you get there, I think you have to imagine, is through CJ Stroud's development. And they're not putting him in a situation to succeed.
The funny thing about, and again, it's one of those things where you'll have to take me on my word that this was my take, but the two teams going into last season that everyone was talking about, like, so one of these two is going to make the leap, and it was the Green Bay Packers and the Houston Texans. And for both of them, I was like, what if they are just stagnant or even slightly regress? And that's what happened. I mean, we always project this type of linear growth in the NFL. That doesn't happen. And it's not, like, it just doesn't.
Yeah, which I'm not the biggest Jordan Love fan either. But that's besides the point.
We'll say that
but
for
yeah,
later.
no. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that's all the AFC and the offseason grades. I think it's time to do some more clip farming, to play some more fun games.
Let's play a game before we head out.
Let's do it. Okay. So, this isn't... Okay. I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit, because there's one... This is what I want to do for the last thing. I think this is going to be fun. Yeah, so we're going to be rating these NFL takes of the 2024 NFL season. So basically what I compiled is 4 of what I think are some of the funniest and worst takes, and I want you to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. What that rating means, I don't know. It could be how funny it is, how stupid it is, how right it is. Most of these are not that correct. But yeah, so I'm going to name an NFL take from last year, and I want you to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. So first,
quality segment.
Yeah, we're going to start off with Chris Canty on Unsportsmanlike Radio after a game where the Bengals didn't punt the ball against the Commanders last year and Burrow threw 3 touchdowns. He said, "I'm tired of all the excuses for Joe Burrow. Oh, the defense let Joe Burrow? No, Joe Burrow let Joe Burrow down. Joe Burrow let the offense down. Joe Burrow let the team down." What do you think about this take?
Listen, I'm here for, I think sometimes Joe Burrow excuses get made too much about the first, 3 weeks of the season consistently across his career. But that's a separate discussion from this. To act like specifically in that Commanders game and across the course of the season after those first 3 weeks, Joe Burrow let the team down it's just simply wrong. And I think that...
It really is. Especially, so I remember after watching that game, one of the things that was said in the commentary was that was like the first game in NFL history.
It's the first ever game to have that much yardage accumulated and no punts by either team.
Exactly. Like, how can you say that the offense let you down when there were no punts? Like, I give this take... Honestly, I give it if we're talking about just trying to just get clicks and trying to generate...
10 out of 10.
It's a 10 out of 10. In terms of reality, it's it's a 0. It's like a 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like this take. I thought this was a funny one. All right. Next up, we got Al Michaels talking about the Jets. So last year, the Jets started off 2-6. And on Thursday Night Football, they played the Texans, and obviously were not favored in that match, but came out and won. And so Al Michaels said, Aaron is very smart, talking about Aaron Rodgers. He's a polarizing figure, but he's very well-read guy. Very smart and is very convincing. We're sitting there going, wait a second. they can't run the table, and then he makes you think they can. And so basically what the analysis was
To be clear,
maybe they can win out.
You you gave more energy to that read of Al Michaels' quote than Al Michaels had energy for the entirety of last season. The man is checked out. Al Michaels is an all-time legend. Like, to be clear, cash your checks, man. Get your, with the exception of some weird like AI stuff with the Olympics in 24, but besides that, Al Michaels is a legend. The man does not care anymore. He has no
He does clearly. Listen, he saw that performance.
I think the underrated best part of this take is I'm just going to ignore the Jets could run the table part. Just being like, he's a polarizing figure, but he's a very well-read guy, very smart. Very
listen.
The word choice of convincing is so good because it's not like he's very smart and very convincing.
I just love that. I just love that he gave no analysis related to the play on the field. He was like, this guy is just he's just in the lab. Like, he's just in the library. He is reading books. Like,
the man, very convincing. Yeah, clearly he's very convincing. He convinced you that they could run the table.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, he scored a 36 on the ACT. Like, this is just a smart guy. Like, he can do it. He can pull it off.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, again, in terms of, I think in terms of just entertainment value, again, this is like a 9 out of 10. Just because this is just such a funny thing to say.
And it's a 2 out of 10 take, which is the same rating as Al Michaels' energy last season in the booth.
Exactly. All right. Last year, Dan Orlovsky, who I think people have mixed opinions about him, after the Falcons or the Eagles lost to the Falcons, he said,
which was objectively a bad loss.
It was. He said the Eagles have really two issues. One, they can't stop the run at all. Two, I don't trust Nick Sirianni to manage the game. I don't trust him in big situations. And before we react, I will say we're talking about this take, but I want us to talk about generally this perception related to Dan or to Nick Sirianni and him as a head coach heading into this year and even in the beginning of the season.
I'm not allowed to weigh in legally because he beat my team in the Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl. I mostly agree with this take.
Oh, really? I kind of had a feeling you would, actually.
I mean, Nick Sirianni, wow. You shaved your head, dude. Cool. You care so much. You're a leader of men. No, the Eagles just have an insanely talented roster. They were bolstered by the greatest running back season in at least a decade, probably longer, potentially since I'd put that last season up against any Adrian Peterson season. I don't care if AP won the MVP. So, yeah. Nick Sirianni is an average NFL coach.
I actually agree, and I even look more towards the offensive coordinator or the coordinators last year.
And you know Vic Fangio, and I say this, Kellen and Moore. I believe this genuinely. I think that, like, if the Eagles came out tomorrow and were like, by the way, we're firing Nick Sirianni, it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah,
like that's okay. Where I'm at, and I know that that's insane and not realistic, but I don't know.
I guess part of me is just like, how can you quantify
I'm teasing my hot take that Nick Sirianni is sneakily on the hot seat and could very easily be fired at the end of next season, which is a correct take.
Oh. I love how you use the phraseology hot take, implying that like it's like
hot
it's
take,
not really a hot take in your mind. Like, exactly. Like, you're just like, this is a hot take that is 100% correct. Like,
that's hot take. It's hot take inception.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I just feel like you can't, like maybe you can say, maybe like you can point to the season before they won the Super Bowl, where it's like, there you can see
Maybe
where
you
the
can point to it.
coordinators,
It was a pathetic collapse.
it was, it was, but, but I just think that, obviously you have two Super Bowl runs before that. And I'm not here to say like that Nick Sirianni is some sort of offensive or defensive mastermind, but I just think that like in terms of setting of a culture and establishing that culture and getting your guys fired up and being, that person that your players play for and fight for is incredibly valuable. And so that's where I think Nick Sirianni's value comes in. And for me, I would argue that that's probably the most important aspect that a head coach can have, because I think it's one of the rarest skill sets that head coaches have in the league.
And yet at the same time, going into last season, the Philadelphia front office literally like told him, "Hey, you're having these coordinators and they will be doing what they want to do." Like they literally stripped him of power heading into last season and were like,
They
"You
stripped him
don't
of
have
power in terms of
control."
play calling, but not in
Yeah.
terms of leadership.
Fair,
Like
fair.
he's still the head coach. He still developed their offseason program. Like
Yeah.
I guess part of me is like I do agree with you. I don't necessarily think that Nick Sirianni is some mastermind of a head coach like an Andy Reid or a Sean McVay. But I think that the qualities that he have, that like his strengths are more important than his weaknesses, if that makes sense.
Fair enough.
All right. I think this is the last one. This is Nick Wright, who says, on Saquon Barkley being signed to the Eagles, I don't think he's going to be a difference maker for the Eagles. And basically, when he said this, he was pointing to and saying that his production for the Giants didn't lead to winning, so therefore it's not going to lead to winning for the Eagles.
I mean, yeah, obviously, just objectively wrong. Not a good take. I mean, I I don't have much else to add on to that. I think probably I think where you go wrong with analysis like that is I mean, you're on a talk show and you're searching for takes to have, but I think
Mhm.
where you go wrong in analysis like that is just the assumption that people can fall into, which is in a team sport, when the team isn't successful, you lump them in as a factor of that when you're the best player on the team. The problem is that you can really only even somewhat do that with the quarterback position. So you
Yeah.
can be the running back and be the best player on your team, but you're still the running back. So like, and yeah, he had injury histories and other stuff like that. So I'm not saying that there's not even potentially reasons to believe that, even though in hindsight it's laughable, but that's the mistake that people like that fall into is they're
Exactly.
like, the guy doesn't contribute to winning culture. It's like you're playing, it's 11 on 11 football, man, and he's not the quarterback. So I really
Right.
don't care.
And I think that even people use the quarterback, I think that people look at winning too much in terms of the quarterback play. And
Yeah. And
so
it's the biggest
like
debate
even
that
at
people
that
can
position
have.
where you can, right. And I'm saying like even in that position where you can even use that type of thinking, like people go far with that. And so it's like
Yes. Yes.
imagine how it would look like from a running back situation. But no, yeah, I think that this take is just objectively wrong. He kind of, obviously he stuck his hat on the Chiefs early on in Patrick Mahomes' career.
Well, no,
And
okay, to be clear, I have to stick up for the one main Chiefs guy that we have in mainstream media, mainstream sports media. He was literally like he's a Kansas Cityan. Like
oh,
he's
I
not
know.
a
I know.
yeah.
No, I understand that. I'm
All right.
saying, I guess what I'm really saying is his rise to popularity came to his attachment to the Chiefs. Would that be fair to say? I feel like
Well, he's also actually the big break in his career getting on Fox is because he was a LeBron guy who counterbalanced Skip Bayless being an anti-Bron guy.
okay, but regardless, in terms of the NFL landscape, the point is
Oh
is that he's
yes.
really famous for Chiefs media,
Sorry, I had
or
to
I guess
nerd
like
out there.
being, yeah, it's okay. You're good. He's very famous for his takes on the Chiefs. And so as a result of that, he kind of adopted this mantra of being out on the Eagles, especially when they played the first time within the Super Bowl. And you just see this all the time. I think a great example of this is Skip Bayless and his hate for Braun, like you said, right? Where it's just like, no matter what, you're going to find something to push back against it. And
Yeah.
so this is just one of those situations where he's kind of fallen into the trap where he picked a scheme and he stuck with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all the takes we got. Those are some pretty horrendous
We're
takes
out
that I
of
thought were
takes.
really
We're
funny.
done with takes for the entirety of our time here. We're just going to be regurgitating. We have no more opinions.
Nope. I'm all opinion out.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. Come back later for our grading of NFC off seasons. But like, subscribe, follow, do all the different things, and we'll see you soon.